Just a nurse. That's what Dr. Sterling called her 3 years ago when Katie Morrison arrived at Sacred Heart in Portland. She'd accepted the words the way she accepted most things, without flinching, without argument, without letting him see the scar tissue beneath the scrubs. He saw a quiet pediatric nurse who kept her head down and never spoke up in rounds. He didn't see the hands that could perform field medicine under fire. He didn't see Senior Chief Petty Officer Morrison, decorated for actions in Marjah. He had no idea what was walking through his hospital corridors every morning at 6:27 a.m. Neither did the 300 staff members who passed her in the hallway without knowing her name. What they didn't know would change everything. Katie Morrison stands at the nurse's station at Sacred Heart, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like distant machinery, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. She's been here 3 years, invisible, competent, always early for her shift. Her hands arrange the medication cards in precise rows, a habit from another life, one where precision meant lives. The card slots click softly as she places each one. Around her, the morning shift starts its familiar rhythm. Phones ring. Monitors beep in distant rooms. Doctors move through corridors with the authority of men who've never been told no. She wears a faded denim jacket over her scrubs when she arrives each morning at 6:15 a.m. It's worn at the collar, frayed at the cuffs, the kind of jacket a person holds onto for reasons they don't explain. Inside the lining, sewn carefully with stitches so small they're almost invisible, is a 26th MEU unit patch from Marjah, something she touches briefly every morning before hanging the jacket in her locker. Her fingers find it without thinking, the way muscles remember movements from years ago. The patch is the color of old sand. The thread holding it is military green. It's the only piece of that life she allows herself to keep. Katie checks vitals on the morning census, her voice soft when she speaks to the patients. Just need to get your temperature, sweetheart. Her hands are steady as she works through the checklist, blood pressure 118/76, pulse 82, respirations 14, temperature 98.6. Numbers that tell stories. Numbers that mean things. There's a slight tremor in her left hand when ambulance sirens wail outside, that sound that cuts through 15 years of distance and brings everything back, the rotor wash of a Black Hawk, the whine of ordnance incoming, the radio crackle of Angel 6, we have a casualty. She sets the blood pressure cuff down. Takes a measured breath. The tremor stops. The other nurses chat about their weekends. You doing anything fun? One asks. Katie smiles, says nothing about her own. She listens instead, the safe position, the invisible position. The one where nobody asks questions. A physician's assistant named Derek leans against the counter, reviewing the morning admissions board. He mentions a new case coming up from the ER, his voice carrying that tone doctors use when they've already decided the outcome. 12-year-old kid. Diving accident. Paralyzed from the chest down. Multiple physicians already looked at him. Case is hopeless. Derek shakes his head, professional, detached. Commander Garrett brought him in about an hour ago. The father's military, you can tell. Uniform, bearing, the way he holds everything inside. Katie goes still. Her hands pause on the medication cards. Liam Garrett. She knows that name. She knows it intimately, though Liam has no idea who she is. He's her son Ryan's commanding officer in the Sea Cadets, has been for 8 months now. Ryan talks about him constantly at dinner. Commander Garrett is the coolest guy ever, Mom. He taught us how to navigate with a compass and how to tie a bowline that could hold under any tension. He says the difference between a good leader and a great leader is knowing when to listen instead of when to talk. Ryan had said this last week while stabbing at his pastor, his voice animated in a way it rarely gets anymore. Katie had listened, had filed the information away, had made a mental note to ask more. But she hadn't connected the name to a 12-year-old patient. Now she does. The connection lands like a stone in her chest. Dr. Sterling arrives on the unit at 7:15 a.m., his Italian shoes clicking against the tile floor with the rhythm of certainty. His suit costs more than Katie makes in a month, charcoal, tailored, the fabric moving with him like authority itself. He carries the preliminary chart on the Garrett case, already reviewing it with a dismissive shake of his head before he's even seen the patient. His voice carries across the station, loud enough for everyone to hear. Paralysis from mid-thorax. Likely spinal cord transaction. No reflex recovery, no sensation. We'll get him stabilized, but understand that his quality of life going forward is essentially non-existent. These cases don't recover, people. Biology is biology. He says this with the certainty of someone who has never been wrong, or who has never allowed doubt to crack his conviction. Katie listens. Her face shows nothing. Her hands continue their work. But her mind is moving through the case already, the way a good clinician's mind works, the way hers learned to work in a trauma tent where you had 90 seconds to decide if someone lived or died. Paralyzed from the chest down. Mid-thorax injury. No reflex recovery. These are the symptoms, but they're not the diagnosis, not yet. She's learned that much in 3 years of keeping her head down. She's learned that the loudest doctor is rarely the most thorough. She's learned that cases declared hopeless are often cases that simply haven't been looked at correctly. Liam Garrett arrives on the pediatric unit at 8:40 a.m. They bring him up on a stretcher, a thin boy with dark hair and his father's bearing, though the paralysis has already started to change his face, confusion and fear mixing into something that makes Katie's chest tighten. Commander Garrett walks beside his son, one hand on Liam's shoulder, and for a moment Katie sees what Ryan sees, a man who radiates the kind of leadership that comes from having made life-and-death decisions and lived with them. The commander is in his Coast Guard dress uniform, the creases sharp enough to cut. His eyes are the color of slate. His jaw is clenched so tightly it looks like it might break. Dr. Sterling meets them in the hallway, his demeanor shifting instantly into something that looks like concern but feels like theater. Commander Garrett. I'm Dr. Sterling, attending physician. I've reviewed your son's imaging and initial workup. I want to be direct with you, we're looking at significant spinal cord damage. The prognosis is unfortunately poor. We'll make him comfortable, manage pain, work on rehabilitation, but I want to set realistic expectations. Your son's mobility may never return. He says this with the precision of someone reading from a script he's read 1,000 times, as if he's already checked this box on 1,000 charts. Katie watches from the nurse's station. She watches the commander's face stay perfectly still, the control of a military man who's been trained to absorb bad news without breaking. She watches him nod, thank Dr. Sterling, place his hand back on his son's shoulder. She watches Liam stare at the ceiling tiles like they might contain an answer. Katie is assigned to Liam's care for the shift. She moves through her duties with the same quiet efficiency she brings to everything, checking his full line, adjusting his position with the kind of gentleness that tells her patients she understands their fear. She works without speaking much, without drawing attention, the way she's learned to work. But her eyes are reading his chart, reading the imaging notes, reading the gaps between what the doctors have said and what the scans actually show. She notices things. A compression fracture at T8 that the radiologist noted but nobody's examined closely. A possible soft tissue injury that showed up on the MRI but got lost in the larger narrative of the spinal cord damage. Details. Small ones. The kind that get missed when doctors are already certain of the outcome. At lunch, Katie sits in the break room with her usual sandwich and her book, a dog-eared copy of The Last Good Man that nobody knows belonged to her late husband. The fluorescent lights here are even harsher than on the unit. The microwave hums. Someone's lunch smells like fish. She reads the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing it because her mind is still on Liam Garrett, still running through the imaging in her head, still thinking about the commander's face and her son's voice at dinner. Commander Garrett says we can't control the outcome, but we can control our response to it. After her shift ends at 3:16 p.m., Katie stops in the hospital library before leaving. It's a small space, quiet, overlooked by most staff. She pulls the Garrett imaging file from the system using her access credentials, using the quiet authority of someone whose credentials nobody questions, and she looks at the scans on the dark screen. She looks at them the way she was trained to look at trauma assessments, not searching for what's wrong, but searching for what's possible. The compression fracture. The soft tissue hemorrhage. The pattern of swelling that suggests not transaction but contusion. Contusions can recover. Contusions can heal. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't the moment when everything changed. That moment was still coming, waiting in the next shift, waiting in the hands of a doctor who would decide that Katie Morrison's quiet competence was a threat to his authority. She closes the file. She touches the unit patch through her jacket lining, the way she does when she's thinking about something she can't say out loud. She walks to her car in the parking lot at 3:55 p.m. and drives home to her son, who will mention over dinner that Commander Garrett seemed sad when he dropped off one of the cadets that afternoon, and she'll listen to that information settle into everything else she now knows and say nothing about it, because she's learned how to carry things that aren't hers to carry yet. The computer terminal glowed in the empty pediatric wing at 11:33 p.m. Katie sat alone. Her shift ended 2 hours ago, her ID badge clipped to scrubs that still smelled like antiseptic and something else, fear, maybe, though she'd trained herself not to recognize it. Liam's CT scans filled the monitor, layer after layer of his chest cavity rendered in grayscale. She scrolled slowly, methodically, the way she'd been taught to read terrain maps in Marjah, not looking for what she expected to see, but what was actually there. The mediastinum. Subtle. A widening that shouldn't exist. Not on the formal read. Not in Dr. Sterling's dismissal. Not in the hopelessness he'd already decided for a 12-year-old child. Katie's fingers trembled slightly as she pulled up the adjacent images. The pleural space. Fluid. Just enough to miss on a casual scan. Just enough to kill if it kept spreading. Nurse Morrison, isn't it past your bedtime? She didn't jump. Years of field medicine teaches you to hear danger before it speaks. She turned in her chair, face composed, to find Dr. Sterling standing in the doorway with his coat still on, his presence somehow making the fluorescent lights seem dimmer. I was reviewing, Katie began. You were reviewing diagnostic imaging. You. He moved closer, his voice smooth as a blade across whetstone. A floor nurse. Whose entire scope of practice, according to Sacred Heart's own job description, extends to vital signs and bedpan management. Katie stood. Her eyes met his for exactly 1 second, long enough to show she wasn't afraid, short enough to show she knew her place. That was the calculation she'd perfected over 3 years, a peer competent enough to be harmless, deferential enough to be forgettable. I noticed on the chest CT, there's a widening of the mediastinum that. Nurse Morrison. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You take vitals. You change bedpans. You do not interpret diagnostic imaging. You do not second-guess attending physicians. You certainly don't lurk in dark corridors playing radiologist at midnight. Is that clear? Yes, doctor. Good. Go home. He didn't wait for her to respond. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song as she shut down the terminal, the scans disappearing into darkness. She drove home in silence, her hand steady on the wheel, her jaw clenched so tightly she'd have a headache by morning. The next day arrived with the weight of institutional machinery. Katie was charting at the nurse's station when Dr. Sterling walked Commander Garrett and his wife toward the care conference area. She recognized the Garretts immediately. The mother's face had that particular devastation of parents whose children have broken, and the commander moved with the rigid control of a man holding everything together through discipline alone. Liam had his father's jaw, Katie had noticed. His father's stubbornness. Dr. Sterling gestured toward the lightbox where Liam's scans glowed. His voice was clinical, authoritative, the voice of a man who knew how to sound like he cared. The CT shows extensive spinal cord compression. The diving accident caused not just the initial trauma but ongoing edema that's destroying neural tissue. We're past intervention. Any aggressive attempt at decompression would cause more harm than his condition already has. I recommend comfort measures and palliative consultation. That's what's best for Liam. Katie's hand stopped moving. The pen hovered above the chart. In her peripheral vision, she saw Commander Garrett's shoulders drop infinitesimally the moment hope died. "Dr. Sterling." Her voice was soft. It would have been inaudible if the fluorescent lights hadn't paused for just a second in their humming. "I noticed on the chest CT." He turned toward her, and the expression on his face was almost amused. "Almost. Nurse Morrison, I don't recall asking for input from an overreaching floor nurse playing doctor." His volume increased just enough for the Garretts to hear every word clearly. The nurses at the station froze. A resident looked away. The Garretts need medical expertise, not speculation from someone whose training ended at an associate's degree. Commander Garrett looked uncomfortable. His wife's hand found his arm. Katie's jaw tightened. Not a flinch, just a visible awareness that the blow had landed. She took one measured breath, the kind that comes from 1,000 moments of self-control, and when she looked at Dr. Sterling, her eyes were steady. A single tear traced down her right cheek, not trembling, not breaking, just present. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, the movement precise and deliberate. "Commander Garrett's son deserves better than your ego," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away, her spine straight, her steps measured. She didn't run. She didn't retreat. She simply removed herself from the room with the kind of dignity that made the silence after her departure feel like an indictment. By lunchtime, the entire pediatric wing was whispering about it. Katie walked into the break room at 12:15 p.m. carrying a container of yogurt and a spoon. The table where the nursing staff gathered every day held 6 nurses and 2 residents. Conversation stopped. One by one, without speaking, without meeting her eyes, they stood. They gathered their half-eaten meals, their phones, their dignity. They filed out silently, a coordinated exodus that lasted exactly 12 seconds. Katie sat alone at the empty table. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a sound like static electricity. She looked at her yogurt. She didn't eat it. She just sat there, practicing what she'd already learned once, how to exist in a room that had chosen to erase you. By 2:17 p.m., the formal written warning appeared on the unit bulletin board. It was printed on official Sacred Heart letterhead, positioned directly next to the staff schedule where every single person would see it. The typeface was clinical, impersonal, the voice of institutional machinery grinding forward. Nurse K. Morrison, written warning. For overstepping scope of practice and undermining physician authority. The day shift clustered around it like a crime scene. Whispers moved through the unit like contagion. She heard them. She was meant to hear them. This was stage 4 of Dr. Sterling's escalation, no longer social mockery, now strategic institutional destruction. He was building a file. He was documenting. He was making her termination inevitable. Katie continued charting. She took vitals. She changed bedpans. She remained invisible and perfect, the way invisible people learn to be. At 2:19 a.m., her phone rang. She knew it was the hospital before she answered. She'd trained herself to know these things, to read the space between rings, the quality of silence, the weight of institutional need. Sacred Heart calling for nursing staff, the voice on the other end said. "We have a critical staffing shortage on pediatrics. Can you come in for the night shift?" Katie was already out of bed. "I'm 30 minutes away." She arrived by 3:02 a.m., pulled on scrubs in the locker room, and before she hung her jacket on the hook, she touched the faded 26th MEU unit patch sewn inside the lining, the one from her husband's coat, the one she'd kept stitched into every jacket she'd owned for 11 years since Marjah. Her hand trembled for exactly 2 seconds. Then she was ready. The pediatric wing at night felt like a different hospital entirely. The overhead lights dimmed to night mode. Most patients slept. The machines beeped their steady, reassuring rhythms. Everything felt almost peaceful. Until Katie checked on Liam at 3:54 a.m. He was restless, his sheets twisted, his face flushed. She placed her hand on his forehead. Warm. Not fever warm, but something else. His eyes opened. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. "My chest hurts," he whispered. "And I can't, it's hard to breathe." Katie's training kicked in like a switch. Distended neck veins. Respiratory distress. Blood pressure 88/52 and dropping. Heart rate 127, climbing. She pulled up his latest chest X-ray on the bedside computer and saw it immediately, fluid in the pericardial sac, the space around his heart. Fluid that was compressing his cardiac chambers. Fluid that was killing him. Cardiac tamponade. An undiagnosed chest injury from the diving accident that no one else had seen. She paged the on-call resident stat. The response came back, ETA 20 minutes. Katie looked at Liam's vitals. At his face. At the way his small shoulders struggled to draw breath. She had 10 minutes. Possibly less. "I need supplies," she said to the night nurse beside her, a resident named Chen who'd gone absolutely pale. Ultrasound probe. Sterile field. Betadine. 18-gauge needle. Dressing. "Katie, you can't, he needs an attending. He needs a surgeon. We don't have one. We have me." Her hands moved to Liam's bedside with a kind of precision that comes from field medicine in Marjah, from holding a bleeding Marine while mortars thundered overhead, from knowing that hesitation was the same as homicide. Her mind ran the procedure like a map, the fifth intercostal space, midclavicular line, needle angled 45 degrees toward the left shoulder, ultrasound guidance steady, bevel forward, advance until resistance changes, and then. "What's happening?" Commander Garrett stood in the doorway. He must have been sleeping in the waiting room, must have sensed something was wrong the way parents do. "Your son's heart is being compressed by fluid," Katie said, not looking up, not breaking rhythm. "I'm draining it." She prepped Liam's skin with betadine. The smell of iodine filled the small space. She positioned the ultrasound probe, watching the grayscale image of his pericardium appear on the monitor. The fluid was visible, a dark lake surrounding his heart. "Liam, this will hurt for a second," she said gently. "But then you'll feel better." The needle advanced. Through skin. Through intercostal fascia. Into the pericardial space. Straw-colored fluid filled the syringe. Liam's shoulders dropped. His breathing eased. His oxygen saturation climbed, 88, 92, 95. His blood pressure rose. His heart rate began to normalize. The compression released. The fluid drained. Life returned to his small face. Katie withdrew the needle with the same precision she'd inserted it. Applied pressure. Counted to 60. Applied sterile dressing. "He's stabilizing," she said quietly. The on-call resident burst through the doors at 4:03 a.m., still pulling on his jacket, only to find his patient's vitals climbing back toward normal, Katie's hand steady, the crisis already resolved. He looked at the bedside ultrasound. At Liam's relief. At Katie's composed face. "What did you?" he started. "Emergency pericardiocentesis," she said. "Undiagnosed tamponade. Chest injury from the dive." His heart was being crushed. The resident checked everything. Confirmed everything. Nodded slowly. "I'm calling this into the attending immediately," he said. Katie was already cleaning up the supplies, her hands working on their own, her mind 3 steps ahead, knowing what was about to happen, knowing that saving Liam's life had just written the final paragraph of her resignation. The phone rang at 2:19 a.m. Katie was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her apartment, the unit patch from her jacket hanging in a shadow box on the wall beside her bed. She recognized the hospital's number before she answered. "Morrison, it's staffing." The night supervisor's voice crackled through. "We're hemorrhaging bodies. 2 nurses called out with flu, and we're short on pediatrics. Can you come in?" Katie sat up. Her scrubs were in the dryer. Her shoes were by the door. ETA 35 minutes. She was in the parking lot by 3:15 a.m., the Portland rain hammering the asphalt like applause. The pre-dawn darkness made Sacred Heart look smaller than it was, just another building holding other people's crises. She didn't think about Dr. Sterling. She didn't think about the written warning or the staff turning their backs. She thought about Liam Garrett, 12 years old, lying in a bed 3 stories up, still waiting. The pediatric unit was hushed when she arrived, the fluorescent overhead panels casting everything in institutional white. The night charge nurse, Donna, spotted her at the station and exhaled with visible relief. Thank God. Liam's been stable but restless. Vitals every 2 hours. His father's asleep in the chair in his room. Katie nodded and headed straight to Pediatrics Bay 4. The door was half closed. Through the gap, she could see Commander Garrett slumped in a chair, his uniform jacket draped over the back, his face etched with the particular exhaustion that came from watching your child suffer and being powerless to stop it. Liam was sleeping, his small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of someone held together by youth and luck and nothing else. The monitors beeped their soft, steady conversation. Katie stepped inside and began her assessment with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Pulse. Respiration. Skin color. The machines told her one story. Her hands told her another. She had learned in Marjah that the body speaks in a language that monitors often miss, that pain is data and vital signs are only part of the picture. Liam's oxygen saturation was acceptable. His heart rate was elevated but not critically. But something underneath those numbers felt wrong, like the moment before an IED detonates, you don't hear it yet, but you know. She made a note and let him sleep. The morning shift would handle it. Sterling would arrive around 6:41 a.m. with his particular mixture of arrogance and surgical precision. The resident who had seen Liam yesterday would. The monitor shrieked. Katie's eyes snapped to the screen. Heart rate 168. Climbing. Oxygen saturation plummeting from 94 to 88 to 82. Liam's body convulsed once, his eyes flying open, his small mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Commander Garrett was on his feet instantly. What's happening? Katie was already moving. Not running. Moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had trained for this, who had done this in the dark under fire. Call a code. Now. She didn't wait for confirmation. The crash cart was 6 feet away. Her hands knew the distance, the angle, the sequence. She reached Liam's side as his father was still processing what she'd said. The boy's skin was gray. Sweat poured down his temples. His breath came in gasps that weren't moving air. Cardiac tamponade. The fluid filling the space around his heart was compressing it with every beat, strangling the organ that was supposed to save his life. She had seen it once in Marjah, a Marine with shrapnel in his chest cavity, and she had held the .4 bag in one hand and someone's rifle in the other while the helicopter came. The boy in front of her had never been to Marjah. He had dived into a pool and struck something inside his own body that even the CT scans had missed. Get me a 14-gauge angiocath, Katie said. Her voice was someone else's voice, someone who had trained at Camp Lejeune, someone who had learned emergency medicine from people who were very good at keeping their soldiers alive. And a syringe. 20 cubic centimeters. The night resident, a young man named Dr. Chen, was running toward the code. He stopped when he heard Katie's orders. What are you? Pericardiocentesis. 5th intercostal space, midclavicular line. He has maybe 4 minutes before his heart stops completely. That's a physician. Katie's eyes met his for exactly 1 second. In that second was every shift she'd worked, every protocol she'd followed, every time she'd kept her head down and her hands folded and her mouth shut. I need the needle. Now. Donna was already there, the crash cart open, supplies flying. The angiocath appeared in Katie's hand like it had materialized there. She didn't think about licenses or scope of practice or the hospital policy manual that somewhere in building administration had her name and the words "an authorized procedure" underlined in red. She thought about the feeling of a needle sliding between ribs, the exact angle, the exact depth. She thought about the hiss of air when you hit the right spot, that small sound that meant you'd found the place between life and death and chosen correctly. Liam's eyes were still open. Still conscious. That wouldn't last. Katie's hands moved on their own, pulling me for tubing, cleaning the insertion site with antiseptic that smelled like 1,000 other emergencies. Her fingers found the space between the 5th and 6th ribs. The intercostal space. The window into the pericardial sac. The needle went in with the kind of certainty that came from having done it under worse conditions, in worse light, with worse consequences for failure. "One more breath, Liam," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Just one more." She felt the subtle give as the needle pierced the pericardium. The change in resistance, like pushing through silk into water. She threaded the guide wire, left the sheath, pulled the needle back. The syringe came next, 20 cubic centimeters attached, and then she was drawing back, and the syringe filled with straw-colored fluid that was supposed to stay inside the sac but was instead choking the heart into submission. 10 cubic centimeters, 15 cubic centimeters, 20 cubic centimeters. The monitor's shriek changed pitch. Liam's color shifted from gray to something closer to human. His oxygen saturation climbed. 85, 88. 91, his heart rate was still high but the trajectory had reversed. The boy's eyes focused on her face. "You're okay," Katie said. "You're okay now." The code team exploded through the door at 3:22 a.m., still pulling on gloves, still moving at the speed of crisis. The attending physician, Dr. Reeves from cardiac surgery, took one look at the monitor, the pericardiocentesis setup, and Liam stabilizing vital signs, and his expression shifted into something that looked like awe. "Who did this?" Katie was already writing down measurements, fluid characteristics, the timeline. "Nurse Morrison." The tamponade presented at 3:42. I accessed at 3:44. 23 CCS retrieved. Vital stabilizing. Dr. Reeves stepped closer to her. "You performed an emergency pericardiocentesis. The patient was in cardiac arrest. Conventional protocol would have." The attending held up a hand. "You saved his life. That's the only protocol that matters right now." The next hours moved in the strange double time of post-crisis management. Liam was transferred to pediatric critical care. For access was established. A pediatric cardiologist was called. X-rays and ultrasounds confirmed what Katie had already known: the fluid was reaccumulating, and the boy would need a proper surgical evaluation. But he was breathing. His heart was beating. His eyes were tracking his father's face, and Commander Garrett was crying in a way that had nothing to do with fear anymore. Katie stepped back from the bedside to let the machines take over. She was stripping off her gloves when she saw the figure in the doorway. Dr. Sterling. Still buttoning his shirt. Still moving with that particular arrogance of a man who had never failed at anything that mattered. His eyes went from Liam to the crash cart to Katie's face, and she watched the moment his brain caught up to what he was seeing. "What the hell happened here?" His voice was quiet. "Dangerous." Dr. Chen was there immediately, stammering through an explanation. "Cardiac tamponade. Emergency decompression. Vital stabilization." Katie didn't move. She held Dr. Sterling's gaze the way she had held the gaze of men far more dangerous than this doctor had ever been, and something in her composure made him understand that whatever he was about to say, she already knew what the consequences would be. Sterling's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. "You performed an invasive cardiac procedure without physician supervision." "I saved his life," Katie said. Her voice was level. Factual. The tamponade would have progressed to cardiac arrest within minutes. The attending's ETA was for minutes. The resident was not able to intervene. The patient would be dead. Sterling's face flushed. He turned away, pulling his phone from his pocket, and Katie watched through the glass as he walked into the hallway and began making calls. First call lasted 90 seconds. Second call, 2 minutes. By the third call, his free hand was gesturing, his voice rising and falling in the particular cadence of a man building a case, constructing a narrative where he was the protector of standards and Katie was the reckless floor nurse who had violated every protocol in the hospital. What they didn't know was that she had already heard the footsteps. Dr. Reeves, the cardiac attending, was standing behind her, his expression cold and precise in a way that suggested he understood exactly what was happening and exactly how this was about to unwind. "You're aware that procedure violates hospital policy," he said quietly. "I am," Katie answered. "You're also aware that without it, the boy would be dead." "Yes." Dr. Reeves nodded once. "Then I'm writing an official statement to Chief Medical Officer confirming this was a life-saving intervention by a nurse with clear indicators of advanced training. Sterling can fight it if he wants, but he'll be fighting it on the record, in front of a 12-year-old who's alive because of what you did." He walked away before Sterling saw them together. Katie was left standing in the blue-white light of the critical care unit, knowing that the real crisis hadn't started yet, that Dr. Sterling's phone calls were just the opening move in a calculation he was already making. She had saved Liam Garrett's life. She had also just written the final chapter of her employment at Sacred Heart Hospital, and somewhere in an administrative office that was still dark and sleeping, a file was about to be opened with her name on it. The clock on the wall read for 15 a.m. By 4:44, 3 board members would have voicemail. By 5:30, the hospital's risk management attorney would be reading Sterling's preliminary report. By sunrise, Katie's suspension would be official. But in the critical care unit, Liam Garrett's heart was still beating. His oxygen saturation was holding at 96. His father was holding his small hand, and for the first time in 72 hours, Commander Garrett could breathe. Katie walked back to the break room, sat down at the table where tomorrow's staff would refuse to sit beside her, and waited for the rest of the day to arrive. The fluorescent lights of Sacred Heart's pediatric unit hummed their mechanical song as the clock on the wall ticked toward 15 a.m. Katie sat in the break room alone, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. The pericardiocentesis needle was still in her pocket. She'd cleaned it, locked it in the supply cabinet where it belonged. Liam's oxygen saturation had climbed from 68 to 94. His heart rhythm, which had been chaotic only minutes before, now moved in steady waves across the monitor. Sinus rhythm. Normal. The kind of normal that meant a 12-year-old boy would wake up tomorrow morning. She didn't allow herself to think about what came next. The unit began to stir as the graveyard shift wound down. Nurses passed through the break room, avoiding her eyes the way they always did now. Katie sat motionless, her scrubs still damp from the emergency, watching the second hand make its circles. At 4:22 a.m., she heard the elevator chime. Footsteps. Quick, purposeful, belonging to someone important. Dr. Sterling emerged from the stairwell with his phone already pressed to his ear, his eyes fixed on Liam's room where she could see the pale glow of monitors through the glass. He stopped. Looked at the monitor display. Looked at the empty needle insertion site wrapped in fresh gauze. Then looked at Katie. "I need to speak with hospital administration," he said into the phone, not breaking eye contact. "Yes. Now." Nurse Morrison performed an unauthorized invasive procedure on a pediatric patient at approximately 2:27 a.m. without physician authorization or supervision. "I have a child here who should be dead, who is instead stable, because that nurse acted outside her scope of practice and could have infected him, perforated his heart, created a pneumothorax." He paused. Listened. "I don't care if it's the middle of the night. This is a liability event waiting to happen." He hung up. "You saved his life," Katie said quietly. "I beg your pardon. You're looking at a monitor that shows normal heart function because I performed a procedure. But you're calling administration instead of admitting you missed the diagnosis." She stood slowly, her movement deliberate, controlled. "That child had a tension pneumothorax compressing his heart. Your physical exam missed it. Your clinical instinct failed." Sterling's face flushed crimson. "You have no right." I have a stethoscope and eyes, Katie continued, her voice never rising. That's all I need. He turned away from her, already texting. His fingers moved across his phone screen like a man building a fortress, tapping out messages to board members, copying legal counsel, composing the first draft of her termination. Katie watched him work. She understood what was happening. She'd seen it before in different uniforms, different wars. When a man realized he was wrong and had no way to admit it, he built architecture out of policy. He weaponized authority. He turned bureaucracy into a weapon that looked like justice. By 6:33 a.m., Sterling had called 3 board members. By 6:15 a.m., he'd pulled her complete file and begun documenting everything, every small incident, every moment she'd questioned protocol, every time she'd stayed late to review files that weren't technically hers to review. By 6:38 a.m., he'd launched a formal internal investigation into her conduct, complete with a formal letter to the state nursing board flagging her for scope of practice violations. Katie arrived at 6:45 a.m. for day shift, her badge already feeling heavier around her neck. The unit was different. Staff clustered in small groups, voices low. The energy that hovered in pediatric units, usually some combination of exhaustion and determination, had shifted into something else. Dread. The kind of dread that settled in when everyone knew something was about to happen and nobody wanted to be the person it happened to. She didn't see him until she was halfway to the locker room. Dr. Sterling. 2 hospital security officers. The nursing supervisor, whose name was Margaret, a woman Katie had worked with for 3 years. Nurse Morrison, Sterling said, his voice carrying across the unit. You've been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. I need your badge. The unit went so quiet you could hear the ventilators breathing. Katie's fingers moved to the lanyard around her neck. 12 nurses stopped moving. 4 residents turned to watch. 2 attending physicians who'd never spoken to her before suddenly became very interested in the floor. She unhooked the badge. The lanyard made a small clicking sound as it released. She held it out. Sterling took it like he was accepting a surrender flag. Your reckless actions endangered a patient and exposed this institution to massive liability, he continued, his voice steady now that he had an audience. You are barred from hospital property pending the outcome of the investigation. Commander Garrett stepped out of Liam's room. His dress uniform was wrinkled from sitting bedside all night, but his bearing was still military, spine straight, shoulders back, the kind of posture that came from decades of command. His eyes found Katie's, and she saw something there that broke something in her she hadn't known was still whole. Dr. Sterling, this is wrong, Garrett said. This nurse saved my son's life. Whatever protocol she bent. Commander, I've explained the situation multiple times. Security, please escort Ms. Morrison from the building. Katie didn't argue. She didn't explain. She walked between the 2 security officers like they were an honor guard, past the nurses' station where colleagues suddenly became very absorbed in their computers, past the break room where someone had already erased her name from tomorrow's assignment board, past Liam's room where she could hear him asking, "Where's Nurse Katie going? Where is she?" She didn't look back. The elevator doors closed on her reflection, a woman in damp scrubs, no badge, no authority, no name. The rain started in the afternoon, the kind of Portland rain that didn't announce itself but simply arrived, as if it had always been there and everyone else was just now noticing. Katie drove south on I-5, then took the exit toward Willamette National Cemetery. The parking lot was nearly empty. 2 other cars. An older couple walking between headstones with flowers. A maintenance crew near the entrance. She walked. The wet grass soaked through her shoes. Row after row of white stones, each one a life measured in dates. Corporal James Morrison, USMC, 26th MEU. Born 1989. Died 2011. The dates were all the cemetery needed. Everything else, who he was, what he'd done, how his wife had watched him bleed out on a rooftop in Marjah while she applied pressure to a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding because the bullet had found his femoral artery and there was nothing in her medical bag that could stop what was coming, all of that lived somewhere else now. In her hands. In her muscle memory. In the weight of the unit patch she still carried. Katie knelt in the mud. Rain hammered down like applause for the dead. She pulled open her jacket, found the seam where the patch was sewn, 26th MEU, 2009 to 2011, the unit that had taken her husband from her and left behind only a memory and fabric and the terrible clarity that came from surviving when someone you loved didn't. I thought I could help just one more kid, Jamie, she whispered. Just one more. I thought if I was quiet enough, if I kept my head down, if I didn't draw attention to who I was or what I could do, I could live a normal life and also save people and nobody would have to know. She looked up at the grey sky. But I failed. I failed Liam. I failed you. I failed everyone who ever thought I could be more than a quiet nurse in a hospital where nobody asks questions. The rain fell harder. She stayed there for 2 hours, her hands clutching the wet earth above his coffin, until the cold settled so deep in her bones that shivering felt like a luxury she didn't deserve. Until darkness came down like a curtain. Until she understood that whatever came next, this version of Katie Morrison, the quiet nurse, the anonymous healer, the woman trying to disappear into medical anonymity, was finished. 3 days later, she would understand why. 3 days later, the hospital board convened in the executive conference room on the 14th floor of Sacred Heart, 7 members arranged around a mahogany table like judges in a tribunal. The hospital president sat at the head. Dr. Sterling occupied a leather chair beside him, his posture relaxed, his expression the careful neutrality of a man who'd already won. The written documentation was impeccable. The investigation conclusive. The unauthorized procedure. The scope violation. The undermining of physician authority. It would take 15 minutes at most. She would be terminated. Her license would be flagged. Her career would end not with a bang but with a signature on a termination letter. The conference room door was locked. Protocol. Confidentiality. No witnesses to the administrative execution. At 2:34 p.m., that door burst open so hard it cracked against the wall. Ryan Morrison stood in the threshold, his 17-year-old frame filling the doorway, his dress uniform immaculate, Sea Cadet Commander's insignia on his chest. He was carrying a shadow box made of dark walnut and glass. Inside, medals hung from ribbons like captured light, bronze stars, silver stars, qualification badges, unit insignias, and one medal that caught the fluorescent lights and held them, the Navy and Marine Corps medal, suspended from a ribbon of red and white. "Stop," Ryan said. The word hung in the air. The room went dead silent. "You need to see these," Ryan continued, his voice not trembling but firm with the kind of authority that runs in bloodlines. "You need to know who you really are talking about." Dr. Sterling started to speak. Ryan cut him off with a single look. The board members exchanged confused glances. The hospital president leaned forward. "Young man, you cannot be in this room. This is a closed." Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Morrison, Ryan said, reading from a printed service record in his left hand, his voice climbing. "United States Coast Guard. 12 years active duty. 3 deployments. Marjah Province, Helmand, and Sanjin Valley." He opened the shadow box slightly, rotating it so the medals caught the light again. 2 bronze stars with combat distinguishing device, he continued. The board member closest to the door, a woman named Chen, 60 years old, former military nurse, stood and reached for the document. Ryan handed it to her. Her hands began to tremble as she read. "Silver Star," Ryan's voice said. The sound was not shaking. The boy had steel in him. Presented for actions under fire in Marjah. March 2011. Saving 12 Marines trapped in a compound. Dr. Sterling's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth. Closed it. The back of the conference room door opened slightly. A man in dress blue stood there, captain's insignia on his shoulder boards. Rear Admiral James Holloway. He'd been waiting in the hallway. He'd known this moment was coming. But before he could step forward, another figure moved from the shadows of the far corner, a Master Chief Petty Officer, weathered as driftwood, medals covering his chest like history written in metal. His name was Marcus Clayton. He'd served with Katie in Marjah. He'd been invited to the hospital this morning. He'd been waiting in the conference room the entire time, standing silently against the back wall, watching. "I served with Senior Chief Morrison," Clayton said, his voice like gravel under tank treads. 13 years we served together. I was there in Marjah when the IED detonated en route Sanjin. I was there when she pulled a 7-year-old girl out of a burning compound during a firefight. That child is alive today because of those hands. He pointed at Katie's hands. Those same hands Dr. Sterling just banned from healing. The room erupted into motion. Board members standing. The president reaching for his phone. Dr. Sterling rising, his face flushed, his voice climbing. "This is irrelevant. Her military background has nothing to do with scope of practice violations. Nothing to do with." Actually, Rear Admiral Holloway stepped forward, his voice cutting through Sterling's like a scalpel through tissue. "It has everything to do with it." He moved to the center of the room. When he spoke, his words were precise, measured, and absolute. "Dr. Sterling, your employment at Sacred Heart Hospital is terminated effective immediately. For conduct unbecoming a medical professional. For obstruction of medical care. For discrimination and retaliation against a decorated veteran." His eye swept the room. "This is not a suggestion. This is a directive from the United States Coast Guard and the Department of Defense. Senior Chief Petty Officer Morrison provided emergency care that saved a child's life. She did so under circumstances that required the kind of training and judgment that only comes from military medicine under fire. You attempted to destroy her career for that. That stops now." He paused. The silence was the kind that comes from power meeting its limits. "Security," Holloway said quietly. The door opened. 2 hospital security officers entered. They moved to Dr. Sterling with the mechanical precision of men who'd done this before. His face had gone the color of old paper. He tried to stand. One officer gripped his arm, not roughly, but with absolute firmness. "Come on, sir. We need you to leave the building." "You can't do this," Sterling said. His voice had changed. It was thinner now. Desperate. "I'm a physician. I have rights." "I have?" "You have 12 minutes to vacate your office," the officer said. 30 minutes total to leave the property. Your credentials have been deactivated. Your access badge no longer functions." They walked him out. The conference room doors swung shut behind them. The silence that remained was so complete you could hear the ventilation system breathing through the ceiling vents. But it wasn't silence for long. The news vans were already pulling into the Sacred Heart parking lot by 3:02 p.m. Someone had filmed the walkout. 70 staff members watched from the main floor, the corridor, the lobby. A physician being escorted from a hospital in the middle of the day, his white coat the only dignity left to him, his face visible to every camera, every phone, every witness. By 6:24 p.m., the footage was viral. #Doctor fired after punishing more hero nurse was trending on social media. The image of Rear Admiral Holloway standing in that conference room, his uniform ribbons gleaming, had been clipped and reposted 14,000 times. News outlets picked it up. Local. National. A story that fit perfectly into the narrative that people wanted to believe, the quiet hero, the arrogant antagonist, the system finally working the way it was supposed to. By 10:19 p.m., the hospital president was holding a press conference in front of Sacred Heart's main entrance, news cameras creating a wall of light that made everything look like theater. "We failed her," he said into the microphones. His voice was steady but pained. "We failed Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Morrison. Our internal process was flawed. Our leadership was compromised. And this institution owes her not an apology, but a commitment to change. Effective immediately, Katie Morrison is reinstated with full back pay, full benefits, and a formal commendation. She will also serve as a clinical consultant on pediatric trauma protocols. This is the minimum we can do for someone who gave far more to this nation than this nation asked. The cameras flashed. The reporters shouted follow-ups. But the message was clear. Dr. Sterling had lost. The system had turned against him. And Katie Morrison, the quiet nurse with the hidden past, was no longer hidden. By the next morning, Dr. Sterling had already started updating his resume. By the next week, the position he'd been interviewing for at the University of Washington's Research Hospital sent a terse rejection email. By the next month, his wife had filed for separation, humiliated by the endless replays of his humiliation. By the third month, his medical license was under review by the state board, not for revocation, but for restrictions. The National Credentialing Database flagged his profile. Hospitals stopped returning his calls. Colleagues who'd known him for 20 years suddenly didn't have lunch availability. By 6 months, Dr. Sterling was sitting in a strip mall classroom in southeast Portland, wearing a polo shirt instead of a white coat, demonstrating chest compressions on a plastic dummy to a room of bored community college students fulfilling a CPR requirement. His salary was $18.50 an hour. A former colleague from Sacred Heart walked past the classroom window, saw him, and took a photo. That photo made the rounds through the hospital group chat that afternoon. Nobody said anything. They didn't need to. Meanwhile, Katie walked back into Sacred Heart Pediatrics on a Tuesday morning at 7:56 a.m. for her first shift in 3 months. The day shift staff erupted. Not applause, standing ovation. Nurses putting down coffee cups and standing. Respiratory technicians stepping out of supply rooms. Physicians, even some of the ones who'd been silent before, extending their hands. Commander Garrett met her at the pediatric station, his uniform immaculate, his eyes bright with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. He took her hand like it was made of something precious. "Thank you. For everything. For my son." His voice cracked. He tried again. "For never giving up." Katie squeezed his hand once. "That's what we do," she said quietly. "That's what we do." Liam Garrett began rehabilitation under a new care team, a team that listened to every suggestion Katie made. She visited his room every shift, watching him progress from ventilator-dependent to breathing trials, from total paralysis to sensation returning segment by segment, from despair to the kind of fierce determination that only lives in children who've learned what their bodies can do even when doctors said they couldn't. Ryan accompanied her once, standing at attention when Commander Garrett's son greeted him. The two young men embraced like soldiers returning from deployment. The Sea Cadet unit held a ceremony at Sacred Heart, right there in the pediatric gym where Liam would soon begin physical therapy. They presented Katie with a plaque, for courage, for integrity, for service beyond measure. She held it like it was the most precious thing she owned. The hospital administration offered her a position as a clinical educator, training nurses in emergency procedures, teaching them how to recognize what physicians might miss, how to trust their instincts when something was wrong. She accepted but insisted on keeping bedside shifts. "This is where I belong," she said. And everyone understood that she meant it. 6 months after her reinstatement, Katie stood in the pediatric rehabilitation gym at Sacred Heart, afternoon light streaming through tall windows like approval from heaven. Liam Garrett, 12 years old, gripped parallel bars with white-knuckle determination, his legs trembling with effort, supported by a therapist on each side. Katie stood a few feet away, her eyes bright but dry. Watching. Waiting. Present. "Come on, Liam," she said quietly. "One more step." Liam's right foot slid forward 6 inches. Then his left. Shaky. Assisted. Far from normal. But it was movement. It was hope. The therapy team erupted in cheers. Liam's face broke into a grin, tears streaming down his face. Commander Garrett embraced his son, then turned and embraced Katie, his voice thick. "You never gave up on him." "No," Katie said. "I didn't." On the wall behind them, in a simple black frame, was the faded 26th MEU unit patch from Katie's jacket lining, a gift from Ryan, mounted with a small plaque, SCP-OK Morrison, Courage Under Fire. Katie's full uniform shadow box hung beside it now, no longer hidden. Silver Star. Bronze Stars. Navy and Marine Corps Medal. All of it visible. All of it real. This is her story. This is what happens when the quiet person in the room finally speaks. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do. We tell the stories of heroes the world almost forgot. Like the video, leave a comment telling us about a time you were underestimated, and share this with someone who needs to know that courage doesn't always announce itself. The ones who've seen the worst are often the ones who give the most. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear scrubs.